Thank you very much. For the S&D Group, Alfred Sant.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to start by congratulating Mr. Tremosa for his draft. It's very focused and the topics are well chosen. There should be some good discussion points on making a better EU policy framework for the future, even if I don't essentially agree with some often too liberal views in the paper, especially when it comes to state aid. There's the point that has already been made a number of times, a one-size-fits-all approach does not work in this sector. And we need to emphasize that state intervention is in many scenarios well needed, especially when it comes to the provision of services of general economic interest, which goes over business interests. And in this context, state aid in the transport and energy sectors, I don't think it can be simply abolished, particularly in the current historical juncture in which Europe is passing, where there is both the political and the economic will for a transition towards cleaner and more climate-friendly energy supply and in transportation systems. In the transport context, state aid to airlines, as referenced in the draft report, is rather unbalanced. Low-cost airlines are often receiving other kinds of state subsidies against which major legacy airlines often complain. Restructuring of legacy airlines is often needed to safeguard connections for non-viable destinations, such as peripheral and sparsely populated regions, to safeguard thousands of jobs in the industry, and in this context also compete with the precarious job conditions that low-cost airlines offer to their employees, and thirdly also to take into consideration the unfair competition that Europe's big airlines and legacy airlines are often facing when competing with other major non-EU airlines. The same point goes for the draft's call to open up competition in the transport sector for public ports and centrally managed airport networks. These are areas, in my view, which are more often than not crucial for the survival of regional competitiveness, particularly in the context of insular and peripheral regions of the EU. We cannot allow these fundamental economic elements to be dependent upon the mercy of the markets, Mr. President. Then, on national competition authorities, we welcome the rapporteur's approach to the matter, but emphasise that the concept of subsidiarity should be strictly followed. On the digital agenda, Google is here well in the spotlight, and just focusing so much on one company looks a bit strange sometimes, but it makes sense in the digital space, because if you don't do that, you'll be like ignoring the elephant in the room. We have, however, to be careful how to intervene or not within this very delicate market area if we want to allow for innovation in Europe to also flourish. I agree, however, that the very long time that it takes sometimes to arrive at decisions is creating uncertainty which harms players and consumers alike. Then, a very important and recurrent issue, and mentioned in the report, focuses on the need to reallocate adequate financial and human resources to DG competition in order to cope with its increasing workload. Even here, Mr. Tremosa has just made this valid point verbally. Especially also it applies to the sector of the digital economy, where clearly the DG needs to have a full team of home-based engineers and specialists. This needs, however, to go hand in hand with a structural division, in my view, of the DG's competencies. The Commission cannot be judge and jury at the same time. There has to be an organisational and an operational distinction between those who are writing the rules and those who are executing the same rules. Finally, I welcome the draft's request for an in-depth analysis on how the lack of competition in certain parts of the food supply chain is affecting prices and the viability of agricultural producers. This should be looked at, in my view, especially in the context of small-scale farmers, which is increasingly becoming an extinct class of operators in our continent. Congratulations again to Mr. Tremosa. Thank you.